Welcome to the latest episode of Defense Disrupted. I'm your host, Ian Kalin, the CEO and co-founder of Turbine One. I'm honored here to be in front of a live studio audience for the first time ever on our podcast. In the audience, we have a representation of a lot of folks that are veterans of the American national security world and from Silicon Valley's engineering craziness. But I'm honored to be joined here on camera with my guest, Heather Ichord. Welcome, Heather, to Defense Disrupted.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
So, Heather, you have an extraordinary career, and I was just trying to memorize some of your highlights, and it is overwhelming. You are a Marine, you were at McKinsey for a bit, regimental logistics officer, you've been a veteran fellow at the Hoover Institute, and you have been supporting the Defense Innovation Unit for over 5.5 years. But there's one aspect of your public resume that I couldn't quite make sense of. What exactly is Mile37?
Yeah, great question. And again, thanks for having me. So Mile37 is my own company. I advise clients on the hardest mile of the race. I'm an ultra athlete. I've run 31 marathons. I've run endurance events greater than distance of marathons as well. And I find that in these 50-mile races, that Mile37 is the hardest one. You're well past the marathon at that point, which is 26 miles. So you're about 10 or 11 miles past that, and you still have a half marathon to go. And so that's the moment I think that there's this sinking gut punch of I am still in it for the long haul. I can't quite count down from 13 quite yet. But what's interesting is that's when the aid stations really help you out. Right. So my favorite 50-miler is the JFK 50 in Western Maryland, outside of DC. There's a really cool article about this, and believe it or not, the art of manliness, because there's an interesting connection to the Kennedy family and RFK and all that was happening in the force at the time. But the challenge was that every military member should be able to do the 50 miles rucking, walking, running. And RFK set out to do this, unfortunately, in his Corframs, his church shoes. And so I think had some blisters the next day. But in any case, the team there and the aid stations, there's such a great community out there with JFK 50. They come around you in those tough miles with a tremendous amount of support. And anybody who's run an endurance race knows that it's all about the aid stations, it's all about the support crews. And so, again, to make sort of a longer commentary shorter, it's just, to me, it's really smart to have, if you're trying to start a company or scale a company or need advice, you need to have the right support crew. And so Mile37 is trying to evoke that thought of, you're really best when you have the right expertise next to you. And I would also say this is where it translates my world, right? I think that, even this room, but when you start talking about dual-use tech firms, the ability to translate actually becomes one of the most Superman or Superwoman type skills. Is here's one industry that has a challenge, here's another industry that could help. They both have their own acronyms, they both have their own ways of seeing the world. The person who's frankly able to navigate both becomes, I think, really impactful overall. And I am a logistics officer, as you mentioned, by background and training in the Marine Corps. And there's always that quote, right, which is amateurs talk tactics and professionals talk logistics. I heard an asterisk to that quote yesterday, and it was, but legends talk both. And so my hope is obviously to be a legend. But, the joke here, I say in practicality terms, is you've got to be able to translate anything that you're thinking about in terms of strategy to an operational level, to it's strategy, it's ops, it's logistics. Without any of those connecting files, you really start to lose where you're going and what you're trying to do.
Well, brilliant. And obviously you have an entire career of public service that's been core in all of these different elements that you've been working. I want to put a pin on that dual use topic. While I will confess I agree with the intention, my co-founder has been on the record with some skeptical eyes at what that phrase really means. So I want to unpack that a little bit and see if I can better understand the conviction that you have behind that. But before we get there, let's talk more about your origins into this world of public service. So can you help me understand, when did you first see that connection question for yourself. This is way back, perhaps even before your career properly started. Did you always know that you were going to go into this line of work and this kind of public service?
No, actually, I think when I was a kid, I remember making this drawing of, I loved reading mysteries and Nancy Drew mysteries and the Hardy Boys. And I actually wanted to be very much like Nancy Drew. I wanted to have a farm in Iowa. My mother's family is from a farming community in Ohio. And I wanted to have a farm, somehow got Iowa in there, not Ohio. Could have been a spelling error for a youngster. I wanted to have a dog, that was key. And then I wanted to have a blue Mustang, like Nancy Drew. That has obviously changed. When I was in middle school, though, it was right about the time that the Hubble Space Telescope had to get fixed. Remember that? Like the mirror was broken. And middle school is a tough time to be a young lady, like interested in science and math. Like, I just think the middle school years are still so brutal for our kids and probably especially our young girls. But when that mirror got fixed and the images started coming back from the Hubble, like, I just remember being fascinated, like sitting in science class in this very awkward time of your life and like just like getting so excited about seeing these pictures. And so I convinced my parents that if I went halfway and like saved my allowance, that I would be able to go to space camp in Huntsville, Alabama. And then when I went to space camp, they take the kids through a number of different evolutions, and you get to sort of play, role, act to be an astronaut at times. I learned the proper pronunciation of rendezvous, by the way, in that moment. That French word, always tough one. But, they go through the museum, and all of a sudden you're looking at these pictures of the right stuff astronauts. And I was like, they all went to these, service academies. By and large, most of them had military backgrounds at that point. They went to service academies. Some were in the Army, some were in the Air Force, because it was actually in that transition years too of the 50s. And I was like, hey, I'm really interested in, going to one of these service academies. And so as high school sort of progressed, engineering, math, got really into that, got into rowing as a sport. I was part of one of the few public high schools at the time that had rowing as a sport. And I was really like not tough before that sport. I remember having to row in February, and I was like, oh my gosh, we're breaking ice on this river, and I am not dressed for this. But you grow up and you go through those experiences and the tough experiences. And then when I was able to apply to the Naval Academy, like I did. And so I entered the Naval Academy in June of 2001, and I was a freshman on 9/11. And I just remember just the impact that day had on all of us, to include the seniors who were getting ready to commission and to serve in the Navy and the Marine Corps. And, you talk about where you're from, and it's an interesting thing because, like, what a poignant question of like where you're from. Like, some people think of hometowns, some people think of their grandmother's, backyard barbecue, after church. Some people think about a ball field or a sports team. I certainly think of the Marines. Like, that is the number one thing that, like, identity. I am first thing that would come out of my mouth is I'm a Marine. I've got the tattoos to prove it. But when I think about where I really grew up, it was probably not in Vienna, Virginia. It was at the Naval Academy in Annapolis, watching, the push into Iraq in 2003, really reflecting on what it meant to serve. And knowing that, like, as soon as I commissioned in 2005, like, I would be in the fight. And I chose the Marine Corps as a result of that, which is like a totally cool story in itself. But to somebody who grew up as a kid of civilians, but just sort of around or adjacent to a lot of this, I was really excited about the mission. And I think as I've grown in the service, I've become more and more excited about just leading and serving Marines.
I love that story about the inspiration from the Hubble telescope repair.
Oh, I was
and
a total
the pictures
dork.
coming out of that. Yeah, so it's so motivating, and I'm curious as to what are those moments in today's generation. So are there inspirational breakthrough examples that you've seen now? And then broadly speaking, I think it's fair to say that we're speaking with an expert in defense tech broadly. What are those Hubble moments of today?
Yeah, it's a really good question. It's probably two parts. And I was I was a recruiter, an selection officer in Los Angeles for college students as well. After my second deployment, Or you have these conversations of like students asking like, why did you join the Marine Corps? And I remember I didn't have a good answer at the time. I just wanted to do the hardest thing out there. And that seemed to be the right call. It wasn't a like particularly nuanced answer though. So I really had to think about like why to serve. But I think it's two parts, right? So one is whenever you're able to call to someone, give this challenge to someone to inspire them to do something that's outside of themselves, that's bigger than themselves, which is, I think, what the service still offers, particularly the Marine Corps. Just to throw, you know.
We have multiple services represented in the room.
I'm just gonna, I gotta keep, throwing a plug there. But whenever you're able to appeal to someone's interest in serving something greater than themselves, that's great. The second part, though, is I think it's interesting and curious to see how people respond to what we would call as like military professionals, the changing character of war, right? So maybe it's recent conflicts that we're observing in Europe and the Middle East. Maybe it's interesting technologies that apply to sort of a gaming community or, a drone interest community. But like, there's so many things that are changing about how we're thinking about the conduct of warfare that we really need smart folks to provide expertise, to give us expertise. And also, again, we talked about translation or like being translators, like translating what they know into the service. And I think everyone thinks of the military services, well, I think it's changing, but for a long time, we thought of the military services like this monolithic like block. You see folks in formation, and if they're doing it right, you're really only seeing one step. You're not seeing 25 steps or 30 steps. But that doesn't mean that each one of those individuals brings something unique to that fighting formation. And they both need to be their individual self, but then also part of the formation in doing that. And so I laugh because, you never want to be a snowflake, but your snowflake skills are actually really helpful in particular moments that like, we need your brain, we need your heart. Like this is how you contribute to the team. And I have this really interesting story about, or just like funny story, I guess. We were stuck on a convoy, way back. And one of the young Marines that he and I had checked in the same day together. He's a Lance Corporal, I'm a lieutenant. We looked at each other in that moment, we're like, do you know what's going on? And he's like, nope. And I was like, I don't either. Yeah. But in the middle, like fast forward, in the middle of a road, like that we're stuck, here's Lance Corporal Cardarelli, who checked in with me the same day. And he runs over to the truck and he's like, man, I got this. I can figure out a way to get us moving again. And I'm like, let's do it. Like, and 30 minutes later, after a great deal of pulleys and straps and things that were, going on, he got us moving. And so, I think of that often. I think about the role of the individual with the group as well, the team.
I love that the story, the show that even in I think the point of like the monolithic military, you can end up still having extraordinary innovation within the service.
Totally.
I think you touched on also the same point, and I think this is maybe I'm projecting a bit, but on the outside end of the U.S. military, you're trying to keep track of what they're asking for, and many different people are asking for things that almost seem contradictory. And so I think that is one of the biggest translation challenges. A lot of those in industry that are mission-driven, trying to help, can't speak the same language, and then end up reacting to this mistranslated request. And so, if that's and perhaps an unfair criticism of the extraordinary collaboration between the U.S. military and industry, I think you've seen so much of the successes there that I'd love to learn more about where you see those successful trends. So like, what are those trends in defense tech? What are the urgent needs? What are the examples of folks that can break through the, of course, often made fun of bureaucracy to actually deliver a better capability to fix that problem, just like that Lance Corporal did out in the field for you?
It's all about use cases, right?
Okay.
And
So like, what are those use cases? Like, so we got like I'll just pick out some popular ones, right? A lot of drones, a lot of AI, a lot of hypersonics, a lot of web-based stuff, and I think there's a lot of swirl in those areas, and maybe some bold promises, and maybe folks aren't delivering. But are those the kind of like topics or trends that you're seeing a lot of attention on, or is that all hype?
Well, so I would call those products or even services, and they're things. Then the question is, what's the use case? How does the military plan to employ those things? Assets, critical technologies, because it's not just a drone, right? Like, okay, a drone does something. Is it ISR? Is it kinetic? How do we think about employing that alongside of operations that are happening at the tactical level or even the operational level? And all of a sudden you're going to start teasing out different requirements in that conversation, which I would then say it's not rocket science, but it's bands of themes. Okay, I'm going to bin this, I'm going to bucket this, McKinsey, here's my McKinsey expertise coming to full force. Bin and bucket. I'm going to bucket that use case in this type of area. Can it then overlap with something else, or does the technology itself start conflicting? Okay, so that was like a word salad, but the need to move things, at some point, the engineering really comes into play, especially when we start talking about small craft, littoral crafts, maneuver crafts, even drones. The swap on them, so size, weight, and power, will end up conflicting based off of how much fuel you actually want to take with you, or the battery, like legs of the battery versus what you want to carry, or how long you want it to be in duration, right? So that's where, but let's bound the box of what we can do, but that's like the technology side. Let's go back to the actual mission need and the requirement, and how we actually think we're going to fight together. And this is where it's very interesting to see, force design on the Marine Corps side and transformation and contact on the Army side. It's like that you have leaders trying to say, hey, this is how we're going to employ these technologies with our forces. And then, my advice to folks in industry would be, have them take it down to an even further level of detail and specificity of, okay, you've got a squad, platoon, company. Is it going to what headquarters size element or what unit size element is it? And, walk me through a day-to-day operation here, and walk me through the way that all the other things around that unit are either supporting, refueling, refitting, maintenance, et cetera. Because, especially when we think about being in a distributed environment, you can't necessarily have a contractor sitting right there helping to operate the system. So you very quickly go from the technology of the system or the asset to the concept that you're actually using with the formation who's employing it, to some of the things that the military actually has to do largely on its own, which is all this, training and practicing and rehearsals standpoint. So, that's, if you want the whole picture, there are any number of places where it breaks down in that process, if we're just being completely honest with ourselves. But I do think that the times are changing. Recent years, I think there's an imperative to get it right and better, but it really does take all of us to do that.
Okay, so I got my final question before I open it up to a crowd of folks that care a lot about what you're sharing. You mentioned the use cases. I love that advice. It's very actionable, even in my work life here. So then recognizing that we are, I guess we're being recorded, so we're somewhat on the record, but we're here as an individual, in an individual capacity. We're not speaking on behalf of the government or the company. We're obviously not going to talk about anything classified or too sensitive here. But I still think there's some broader lessons, given what you're working on and your expertise, to at least talk more about those use cases. Are there certain use cases that keep you up at night? Are there a few examples of things that we are not doing too well there, and there's some more that could be done within those partnerships that you were just outlining?
Yeah. I think it's always a really good, it depends on the company, number one, of what's their special sauce.
I'm not asking for any endorsement here, no special treatment.
No,
right?
I think
that's from your perspective.
I think that, data is needed in any of these situations, right? So is it a hardware product? To what degree is that modular then with the software product, right? And we should be thinking about, hardware as a shell for software, which is not a new idea. But it's still a hard idea.
It feels pretty revolutionary to me. I think a lot of folks would be deeply offended by what you just said.
Yeah, well, it's not a new idea in the software industry. It's not a new idea in Silicon Valley, but it is challenging, I think, when you start thinking about capital assets that we have traditionally used for years and years, decades in the US military. And so then the question becomes, how can I peel off different parts of that aircraft carrier or whatever, like military industrial complex type system and improve it at a speed and a rapid rate that it is increasingly relevant and updated to the warfighter. We know there's software tools just that exist that we're already using and employing. On the far end of the spectrum, there's these assets that, really only need to, or only can be developed in a lot of ways by the military industrial complex. There's a really large swath in the middle, right? Mm-hmm. It's never binary. It's never black and white. So like, how can I keep moving things in the direction where that iteration is happening faster and faster and faster? I think that is a specific challenge of companies right now. And I also think it's a specific challenge that I would, throw out there for folks that want to work with the government, because I think that we need hardware, but we need hardware that's going to stay updated. And so then the question is how? And then how do we also make sure that trail of like all the way back to training and rehearsals to our fighting formations, like actually is thought about and considered in those updates as well. I mean, I think the young people in the service will always amaze you when they actually have the tools to succeed, when they actually have the gear sets to succeed. But we do need to be very thoughtful about how we give them time to train with it, right? Like, they've got to have time for training. And it's the only way that you're actually able. It's not special formations. There's a lot of special formations out there too, where, smaller units, you've got special operations that like have unique time, unique skill sets, unique training opportunities. I'm talking about my Motor T drivers. And as a logistics officer, I get to work with some great folks that are, frankly, like just one of the guys, one of the gals, like one of the service. But what we're seeing is, and what I think about all the time is, if I had an FPV drone instead of aircraft overhead while running my convoys in Al Asad, or out of Al Asad in Al Anbar in 2007, 2008. Like, if I were even to put myself in that scenario with today's technologies, it would look very different, even though it also would look very similar. And like, to have assets for friendly use, I think about that literally as a second lieutenant running convoys. I also think about, like, if the adversary at that time had those, FPV drones instead of IEDs or in addition to IEDs, or maybe they're just flying IEDs. Like, this is not novel when you start looking at Russia, Ukraine, but it's still challenging, I think, to U.S. formations, because I'm not convinced that we've practiced enough in the type of conflict that we're seeing still overseas.
Well, that's forbidding, but the good news is that I'm not going to have to address that in any great detail. I'm going to instead open it up for the room to consider. So let's ask some questions from the audience.
Well, I mean, it's probably twofold, right? Like, one, it's like the way that you attack the mission. I was in uniform yesterday. I went to a change of command, saw some old friends, of course, which is always great. Locked my keys in my car. Always great to do on base. Sitting there like, gosh.
You got some Navy people giving.
I know, I'm getting some serious shade. I think, it's very easy, especially because everybody has these moments in the service or in uniform where, like, or just in life, like, let's just be honest, right? Of like, oh man, screw it. This is like, I don't want to do this anymore. Like I want to get out. Like, that's every service member at some point has this moment of frustration of like, screw it. I want to get out. I want to go do something else, where it's easier. Like, that is a total trap. Like, nothing is easier. And I think that the hard is what makes it great. Like, the challenge is actually what makes it great. To like run through the field, like run down the field with blood on your face and like score like that, or move the ball down the field. Like, I think of that sort of every day. Rowing against the current is, sort of my metaphor, and takes us back to F. Scott Fitzgerald and The Great Gatsby. But I think the imperative of making sure that we feel like we're sitting on a hot stove right now, like, because we are, and that's why people working together, industry and the services, is so vital. But I also think specific to the tech, right? I think, and I didn't fully answer your earlier question, right, which is what keeps me up at night. to me as a logistician, it actually is the way that we think about sustainment. So at the operational level, logistics is actually not a warfighting function. Sustainment is the warfighting function. That's what we call it. And thinking about a holistic way of sustainment through, the theater actually becomes something that you need to be able to use data, places, nodes to your advantage to win. And I think that being able to translate the challenges of being a logistician and all the manual processes that we still use into sort of conversations about that, to me, like that has been a real challenge. The VC side, that's like direct from service member to, sort of now civilian, then back to industry or tech companies. I think when you start thinking about the VC community, like venture capitalists just want to know what the demand signal looks like in a much more focused way so they can invest in the right places. And so I think, the Defense Innovation Unit is doing a lot of work in this space with the commercial operations team and like trying to be very transparent about what's coming down the pipe and trends in defense spending, trends in defense investment, like on the services side. Because, to the outside in observer, like trying to understand the defense budget minus some wave tops is actually quite hard. There's some good tools out there. There's some good, some folks that are doing that work, but, it still remains a little bit hard. So they're doing a good job of like shining some light on those. Okay, I'll start with the second question first. So opportunities and investments, it's a little bit of what I said before. Like having a software mind in a traditionally hardware type, again, not rocket science. This is not brilliant sort of commentary, but like pushing this idea that like we need to have a dynamic and software mind, even though we're using, a good amount of hardware, a lot of hardware. But how do we keep it updated? How we keep updating the training? Like constantly pushing yourself to think about how can we continue to iterate this and update it so that it's constantly dynamic and works at the tactical level. Like, and works and is useful. Like that is the most important part, right? Like I don't need Marines that have, or any service member, any warfighter having something that, doesn't work in their hands. They are at their very, very best when we give them the tools to succeed and to be lethal. And so let's do it. I think the opportunity shaping or the real challenges then become like scaling. And that's not something this is where the defense tech world needs to continue to learn from all of the industrial companies. And I'm not just saying defense industrial companies. I'm saying all of the like tried and true industrial companies in this country and learn lessons also from globally. But having 5 pieces of something as prototypes is actually not useful either. Like think about the number of squads in the services, squads, platoons, companies. Like these tactical units are the ones that actually, close with and destroy the enemy, at least in the ground side formation, right? So I'll think of Marines and I'll think of Army. Navy, that looks slightly different, of course, and Air Force as well. But like when I start stacking those formations, times, like, doing the multiplication, if it's 3 drones per squad or 5 drones per squad, whatever the right number is per squad, multiplied by the number of squads in our formations, like, okay, how many drones is that? And those are just the ones that you're actually using. Are they multi-use, or am I gonna, shoot one and then it's gone? And if the defense industrial complex is not able to produce and scale at that level of demand signal, then, we also have some issues. Now, it's also up to the services to ensure that they're giving that demand signal and they've budgeted for that demand signal. And I think we've seen some changes recently in how, the services and the administration, like even over the last couple of years, where that's changing and not changing fast enough. So I'll shoot on both targets here, but like, let's make sure that we can actually produce. And that's up to like tried and true to American manufacturing. Yeah, it's a good question, right? I mean, it's the constant challenge of what's your portfolio mix? Do I go more stocks or bonds this year? And I do think that we need to think about it as a portfolio. Modular, scalable, those are all buzzwords, but they do mean something if you actually, so this is where my logistician hat comes in, right? Show me what a low-end fight looks like with this type of gear set. How can I cluster things together to conduct a low-end fight? How can I cluster other things together to put together like my response in a high-end fight? And so, and constantly thinking about the trade-offs and true risk acceptance, risk tolerance, risk-based decisions. I'm not convinced that we do risk right in the services or in the government. I think we do risk retrospectively. I think that we actually could learn a lot from the financial institutions or sort of when we do risk calculations because they think in portfolios all the time. And so I think that there's probably a better way that we could approach like this portfolio thinking, which then comes down to asset management of individual systems and training pipelines as well. I think then understanding where your flex in the margins actually looks like and what could be swung between like swings. You know, we talk about swing states all the time in the election, but like what are our swing capabilities that could go for the low end fight packaged either the same or differently as they would then for the high end fight. And I think that particularly impacts our Air Force. You know, just sort of riffing here. I think that really impacts our sort of Air Force. I think it particularly impacts our Space Force. It may impact our Navy as well. I'm not sure that it impacts our Army and Marine Corps in the same type of way, just based off of their, you know, Title 10 mission set. Because I wrote a 2x2 as soon as you wrote that, right? Of like, we're really talking about the different parts of that 2x2. But, you know, after 9/11, I do remember seeing, or maybe it was an Intel speech that was given right before that, and it was the Sherlock Holmes and the Watson, you know, sort of story where they're out there on a camping trip, and Sherlock says to Watson, like, Watson, what do you see? Watson starts talking about all the stars he can see in the sky, and like this and that, and, you know, complex, storm in a teacup type thing. And Sherlock goes, well, Watson, like that's all well and good, but what I really was going for is that someone has stolen our tent. And so we really need to plan for both galaxy complexities, I guess, as well as the stealing of the tent situation. That's like a totally dorky metaphor, but you got me talking about space camp earlier.
Well, we're running short on time, and I hope that we're talking about ways in which both our audience remotely and those in the room can further engage with you and ask additional questions. But since I need to repeat it on mic anyway, I'm just going to paraphrase a question that I think my co-founder is thinking about this thing called dual use. So he may or may not have come up with a press release just about a month ago, really challenging dual use as a concept.
I'm glad I stepped in that one there, Corey.
Yeah, so I brought it up before. I came back around full circle, and I'm going to paraphrase his quote. And I think what it really gets at is, given the requirements of national security, security clearances, ITAR, ATOs, cyber, hardening, ridiculously long sales cycles, let alone even planning cycles, let alone budget cycles. If you want to make it big, you got to engage Congress. Like, there's just a lot of stuff that's not normal for a lemonade stand or any other VC typical, over the past 30 years, VC typical corporate investment as a startup. So I think part of that kind of frustration from industry that's trying to do the right things, that is complying with all the rules and the ethics and the systems and the controls, you end up creating basically an entire system that then drives military-only products. Because the rules are so hard to get in, if you can, it's often very difficult for most companies to even overcome that barrier to entry to then actually serve the warfighter. Now, I don't mean that in all cases. I'll just pick on one of my favorite products. I love Microsoft Excel. It's amazing. And I think it's used in the military as much as it's used in private industry. So there's nothing intrinsically military about that software product. I think that one's doing pretty darn well. So I don't want to say it's all bad, but I think that the intention of dual use, and now my opinion, building on my co-founder's been, the intention and the rollout haven't quite been aligned as well as it should have been in the original of rollout. So that being kind of a bit of an opinion as a final question, what's your sense then as to the effect of dual use? How's it going and where is it going to go in the future?
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, and I think it's really the spirit that you're trying to capture more than anything else. So the spirit of dual use, and it has a lot to do with that software mindset that we talked about earlier of being constantly like delivering the best in class. Like when I think about best in class today, while also thinking about not just incremental evolution, but transformative evolution to the next, again, based off of like some real changing needs on the battlefield, in the battle space. So I think I would agree with you. I think we'll meet in the middle on this. I think the way to, and frankly, I think that you just want to keep having this idea of, I don't want to buy a piece of technology and then use it for 20 years and then slep it for another 10 years. And then like 30 years from now, that's the technology I still have, right? Because at that point, you might as well go back to like a handheld compass. I think if we can continue to sort of like, and again, it's almost like playing piano. And Ansel Adams has this quote as well, is that he actually was a pianist as a kid. And then in the summers, he would go out to Yosemite, take these photos. And if you listen to the, sort of the special on Ansel Adams, he thought of his photography like playing the piano, and the different shades of black and white in a photo of, name your, Half Dome in Yosemite. He was like, I play with the grays in the light room and the dark room to like make that as poignant as possible. And so like, if I were to translate that idea back to this, is that if I've got like true software on one side, true defense industrial-based derived technology or hardware on the other side, there's a tremendous amount of gray in the middle. Like, keep the spirit of software alive, keep pushing those things, those systems. You could probably, for some of these, like, again, very complex systems, peel off like the entire system and move it more towards the middle so that it's updated more frequently. The Navy is doing a great job, I think, of like really trying to get there with shipbuilding, not the building of the ship itself, but all of the systems that are in that ship, in the guts of the ship that make the ship go. It's tremendously hard though, but that's where I think, to your point, the spirit of the dual use tech of like being flexible, being updated, that has to remain and retain. The ATO cycles, the budget cycles, everything that you talked about, all of the normal barriers to entry, like I think we're trying to reduce those, number one. But then number two is, yeah, there's a reason why we have security or secure systems in the military and the services. So we just need to be mindful of how to make you successful as well as retaining our end state, which is providing the best technologies and capabilities to the warfighter.
That's all the time we have for this episode. Thank you again to Heather Ichord. If folks want to engage with you from the digital world, what's the best way for them to reach out to you?
I would say like ping me on LinkedIn. I do like respond to those messages. Give me a couple days and I will shoot you a note back. But if folks want to reach out, I'm happy to connect and have a follow-on conversation.
All right. Well, thank you so much for coming here. Thank you for our audience.